The Powering Through podcast is brought to you by National Cornerstone Healthcare Services, a subsidiary of NCHS Holdings Incorporated. NCHS is a full-service health organization which, through its affiliates, includes an accredited specialty pharmacy founded to serve people with hemophilia and other blood disorders and to optimize patient quality of life by providing personalized healthcare services in addition to pharmacy services. NCHS makes independence the goal for people with chronic disorders. They believe the home or an alternate non-clinical setting is the best place to receive treatments, which is why they do so much more than just fill prescriptions. Patients of NCHS can also expect medication therapy management, coordination of nursing services, and much more, including translation services for non-English speakers. Learn more about NCHS's services and the team who provides them by visiting nchswecare.com. Once again, that's nchswecare.com.
Everybody needs an advocate.
Because I'm not there 24/7.
Families that have hemophilia mature faster.
I've been feeling a lot of anxiety lately.
I'm so tired of being strong.
To understand how far we've come helps you appreciate where we are now.
No is just no for this person. Somebody's going to say yes sooner or later.
And it helps you understand that there are more steps to be taken in the future.
You're the first person I've met with a bleeding disorder.
Let's fight the disease and not the people who have it.
Hello, and welcome to episode 10 of the Powering Through podcast, featuring panel conversations on obstacles, challenges, and what it takes to overcome, held for the benefit of the bleeding disorders community. The Powering Through podcast is sponsored by NCHS, produced by BloodStream Media, and I am your host, Patrick James Lynch. Remember to subscribe to the Powering Through podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you listen to podcasts to have the most recent episodes delivered directly to you. And you can visit poweringthrough.org to see videos, photos, and other podcasts from all of our Powering Through events. In this episode, we give a listen to our Powering Through event held this spring during the Bleeding Disorders Alliance of Illinois' Family Education Weekend in Naperville, Illinois. Our participants for this were community members Ann McIntosh, Nichelle Stigger, and Murali Pazhayannur. We start our conversation with Ann. Ann speaks openly about fertility challenges that followed her all throughout adulthood, her unexpected pregnancy at 43 that led to the birth of her son Evan, learning about and adapting to Evan's health challenges, and managing her own mental and emotional health challenges through some of the more trying times. So let's take a listen to our BDAI Powering Through conversation, starting with Ann. You have one boy who's got type 2A VWD, correct?
Correct.
Tell us a little bit about Evan, how he came to be diagnosed.
I was an old lady having babies. I had my first one at 39, and I had my second one at 43, which is Evan. He's 12 now. Because I was old, I went to high-risk doctor, and one day I was laying there on the table, and they were doing their thing, and the nurse left the room, and when she came back, the doctor said, look at this here. That was the beginning of learning big words. Evan has Dandy-Walker hydrocephalus, which is water on the brain. Most people know it from the elephant head people they used to talk about. I had to go to a bunch of specialists, and we decided we were, of course, going to have him early because you can't deliver a baby with head trauma. And then he was born on a Wednesday, and on Monday, they did surgery to insert a shunt into his head, which helps the fluid drain from your head down. It goes into your stomach, and then it just passes out. So he had his first shunt placed at 5 days old, and the next day they did a CAT scan of his head, and they called in the hemophilia people. I didn't know who they were either. And they said he did have a bleed, and they did think it was von Willebrandt's. So we have a dual problem. His first shunt failed, so at 4 weeks he had to have another one placed. Some of these things are inpatient, outpatient, but for him, they are weeks in the hospital because of the bleeding. The good thing with Evan is he was young. I don't think he really remembers any of this. Most of the trauma was to me especially, and my husband trying to keep me calm while we were raising a 4-year-old. The biggest problem we've had for him is nosebleeds. Because he is mild von Willebrandt's, that we really don't have a lot of medicating to do. We keep it on hand. We keep educated. We have a swimming pool, so he swims, which is easy on the joints and doesn't have a lot of contact. But really, the nosebleeds for him is the bigger thing. That's the big thing.
So a couple questions. You mentioned, you mentioned having kids late, and you shared with me before this a little bit more as to why that was.
Right.
Do you mind if I share a little bit about that? You had a few miscarriages.
I had 3 miscarriages.
And you were done. You said I'm done.
I was done because I had a young child, and I thought, at this rate, I'm not getting to enjoy him, and I'm probably going to die because I was just so exhausted.
Emotionally, to be at a point where you've got, because it sounds like, as you've mentioned, despite 2 serious diagnoses, fortunately, things are in good shape.
Yeah, he's good.
When thinking about challenges and obstacles, though, experiencing 3 miscarriages, mentally, emotionally deciding, you know what, I'm done. I don't want to put myself through this anymore. And then surprise, you're not done.
Right.
That's just such a roller coaster. And you mentioned your husband trying to keep you calm.
Yes.
In the early days with Evan. How emotionally were you able to push through what I imagine must have been a roller coaster of emotions around that point in your life?
I'm not sure I did so well sometimes. There was one specific time where I didn't know what to do, and no one would watch him. Everybody said, if you need any help, call us, we'll watch him. I'm like, all right, I've called 10 of you and nobody will watch him. The other people, I wouldn't let watch my goldfish if I had one. So I thought, I am going to get in the car, I'm going to drive down the street, and I'm going to leave him on the side of the road in his carrier, and someone will find him and take care of him. That was the beginning of adult timeouts for me. So whenever I'd feel at my wit's end, I would just put him somewhere where I knew he was safe, and I would just lock myself in the room and either cry or scream and just take lots of deep breaths and wait for my husband to come home. So sometimes you just have to figure out what works for you. And, it was just one long day at a time.
Yeah, and there's something to just making that commitment to one long day at a time, doing it by rote, finding the tactics. I want to ask you one other question before we bring Michelle in too, which is, it sounds as though your husband and the support that he's provided as well is a major part of what helped you cope. Can you talk a little bit about the role of partnership in your life as a parent of a kid with 2 serious medical conditions?
Absolutely. He took care of our 3-year-old. He took care of the house. He made sure that I had what I needed. I had a neighbor 2 doors down that was a pediatric nurse. One day I went to her house. She says that I came and I didn't have any pants on. I think I did at least have them on.
How is this a debate, though?
Well, I just refused to admit that I went out of the house with no pants on, carrying the baby down the street.
Fair enough.
My neighbors were good, and, he just allowed me to cry. He went to work. If I called him at 10, he came home. He would say, come on, let's go out to breakfast. He got girlfriends to come downtown to Rush Press with me, when he couldn't come because he had a very demanding job. And he just always took care of our oldest, Donovan, and he just made sure I had what I needed. Sometimes I would go to the store and I would buy ridiculous things, and he'd be like, do you really need, 4 pair of shoes? And I'd be like, no, and I'd take 3 back.
That's a clever way to get 1 new pair, though.
Yeah, so I did develop some things that were, a comfort to me. Like I said, in the day I stayed home with the kids. The oldest one went to basketball or soccer, and so as Evan got older, we would go to that, and that helped get me out and help me meet other people. I didn't necessarily want to tell them what was wrong. I'm sure some of them knew something was wrong. Going to camp was a big deal, and he always wanted to go, and I wouldn't let him go. And the year he went, I literally stayed on the sofa all week. I had to learn over time to let go because I felt a lot of guilt being so old when I had him. And some people were not kind. Because when you're 43 and you're having a baby, sometimes people are not kind to you. They say mean things about being so old and having a baby. And then by him being sick, then I took all that guilt for being so old in having a child.
Did you feel like your age at some point had something to do with it?
I was 35 when I got married. I had fertility issues, so all except Evan were fertility babies. So I did actively pursue having children. I did know the risk of having children at that age. I did not take birth control after I had my last child, but I didn't because I had never, ever gotten pregnant without fertility treatment.
Right.
So there was no reason for me to think that I could have a baby without doing fertility treatment. So it wasn't that I was negligent. I mean, really, how many 43-year-olds just get pregnant? So...
Especially with a lifetime of fertility.
Right, with a lifetime of
challenges.
fertility treatment.
Well, thank you for
history,
sharing that so openly. That's a very personal journey to share, and I appreciate you being willing, because I think it helps to hear what other people go through. It makes us all feel like our struggles are not in a vacuum. Next up, we bring in Nichelle Stigger, who you are about to hear me mistakenly call Michelle. In fact, I already referred to her as Michelle once. You see, typically I do pre-interviews with each guest over the phone. That gives me a chance to learn their story and essentially make the most of our time together for Powering Through. And I had done that for this Powering Through event, except the morning of the panel, one of the participants had to drop out. Basically, he and his entire family were quite sick, and from the way he described the situation at home, it was definitely in the best interest of everyone that he stayed there. So, Nichelle graciously accepted an on-the-spot invitation to take his place on the panel, and I'm very glad she did. She provides windows into her family's history with hemophilia and HIV/AIDS, her becoming a first-time parent of a boy with hemophilia, and the wise words her grandmother once shared with her, as grandmothers do. So, we'll jump back into the conversation with Nichelle right after a quick word from our sponsor. You've heard from NCHS about the services they provide to their patients. Now they'd like you to meet one of those patients, Joe. When Joe first moved to St. Louis, it was a bit of a shock. It's a big city, he was looking for a job. He didn't have much time to try to figure out his new insurance policy or figure out how he'd continue to receive his factor. Joe made a call to an NCHS rep he met at a conference, Kara, and Kara helped Joe get his coverage and his care in order. She ordered Joe's factor and made sure it got to him on the same day every month. She'd call to make sure everything arrived in order and check in on him periodically to make sure that he was keeping up with his care. Kara works for NCHS, the specialty pharmacy and healthcare organization, and this is what she does. She takes some of the hassle out of everyday life with a bleeding disorder. So, Joe was able to focus on his self-care without having to spend hours on the phone with doctors, pharmacies, or insurers. His factor and supplies showed up on time every month in the right quantities, and if there was ever a problem, he could just call Kara. She just made life easier. NCHS. We care for life. Michelle, I don't even know your last name.
I hate to correct you. It's Nichelle.
Oh, Nichelle. I don't even know your first name. Even better. Hey, nice to meet you. Welcome to the panel. Yeah.
It's Nichelle Stigger. That's okay. That's been happening my entire life. In fact, when I was registering for college, you come up to this big table, and the woman's getting my papers, and she goes, "Oh, honey, you spelled your name wrong." And I go, "Well, I probably shouldn't be here if I did that, but that's my name."
That's yes. A very interesting impulse.
Yeah, right?
Well, good. Okay, so as you can tell, this will be a very organic question and answer session because I know only a little bit about you.
Yes.
But what I do know is kind of an interesting place for us to start. We didn't get into this too much with you, Ann, but not having a family history means when you discover that your child has a bleeding disorder, it's all a brand new world. As opposed to when there is a family history, there's decisions about family planning, there's decisions about treatment that are influenced by that history. So can you give everyone a little backstory as to your family's history in the bleeding disorders community?
Yes, so my father had severe hemophilia A, and I remember growing up, my parents divorced when I was younger, so I remember him limping or seeing a lot of ACE bandages to wrap different joints. The whole conversation always was with my grandmother and him of, did you take your medicine? Still, my dad is a grown man, right? And she's still asking, did you take your medicine? You have to make sure that you treat. But he was really hesitant, and I was always like, well, you just have to take the medicine. Why isn't he doing this? Mm-hmm. So I knew that there was something bigger, and I remember seeing a movie about Ryan White. And then I started making these connections and wondering if my dad was going through the same fear that Ryan did.
Probably just worth explicitly saying for
Yes.
maybe some new families that in the 80s, 90% of people with hemophilia, severe hemophilia, contracted HIV or hepatitis C or both from contaminated blood product. So that's a pretty well understood story in the community, but for any newer families, Ryan White was one of those individuals and went on to become essentially the poster boy for HIV and AIDS activism, along now with his mother, Jeannie, who's doing that work. He's long since passed. But anyway, just to
Yes.
clarify for anyone who may not know.
Yes, thank you.
course.
So my dad passed, and I remember going to the funeral and, you know, adults talking, but I'm 12. I feel like I understand what's going on. I have a grasp. I just lost my dad. None of you people really get it, is sort of the attitude I had.
Sure.
And then I went to the restroom, and my cousins were in there. We're all the same age, and they said, "Do you know how your dad died?" And I said, "Well, yeah, he had hemophilia." "Well, that wasn't the reason why. Your dad had HIV." And I remember being so angry. And then after that, you know, you're processing all of this. Actually, one of the hemophilia foundations sent me Christmas gifts that following year. So that's sort of how I started to learn more about the community on my own. My parents weren't together, so my grandmother was doing a lot to make sure that I knew I had it. She always said, "You have a community of people, like no matter what, even though your dad isn't here, you have a community of people, like you have them." And now when I'm even saying this now, it's like an aha moment, because she knew that I was gonna have a family at some point, and you know, at some point maybe have my own kids, and so me staying connected with this community was important. There was lots of turmoil, I guess.
Personal turmoil?
Personal, I think, because I started to do my own research, watching the Ryan White story, and then seeing Philadelphia, and then, because I knew that there was a lawsuit, and I knew that we had, you know, received money, but I really didn't understand why. And it was so simple, you know, just managing this blood, cleaning this blood the way that, you know, you would think the FDA would, but they didn't. So you live and learn. Here we are now. I have a son named Parker Stigger. He's 3.
Let's talk a little about
Yeah.
that, though, because what was the transition from, you know, you're 12, you're not probably thinking about family planning at 12 when you're starting to learn about what happened with your dad, but as you started to realize what had happened and thinking about biology and the odds of your having a child with hemophilia, give us, what was your thought process like?
So right away I was like, I'm never, ever having kids. Then I got married, and then I was like, okay, you know, things happen, babies happen, so we need to make sure that we understand what our options are. I just had an annual checkup, and this doctor goes, "Oh, your dad had hemophilia?" And I go, "Yeah, you know what that is. That's so surprising." And he goes, "Oh, you should not have kids. You should not have kids at all." And I went home that night and just bawled my eyes out, didn't leave my room. I was just like, "What do you mean? Like, you know, someone just told you that, who?" And so I decided that wasn't going to be my journey or my road, but then we thought about, like, for me, is that right to be able to have control over this? So we went back and forth, and we said, okay, we'll wait a year and just sort of figure it out. Well, we waited a year, and we got Parker without any planning.
A theme is emerging.
Yes. So these guys are meant to be, for sure. And I was scared. And there is this guilt and shame that I still have, but that is not as heavy as it has been, talking to some of the really strong moms here. And so I was telling Aaron, like, there's a certain language that we're going to have in our house. When we speak about Parker before he comes out, he is not sick. He is normal, you know, and you start getting this in your vocabulary now. This is so important to me. I sent out a Christmas letter to everyone, like, explicitly explaining that. And I kept myself in a bubble because I knew that my extended family on Aaron's side, they were really scared, and they were sort of thinking, you have options, do you want to do this? And so I was like, shutting you out, because this is a child, so this has to happen. This is our baby, and this is what was given to us, and so this is how we're going to have to deal with it.
Yeah. And it's completely manageable.
Right.
It's completely manageable.
Right. And then gradually we got Aaron a little more comfortable with it because, all of these different things that he just saw he wasn't going to be able to do. And I'm trying to tell him he can do these things. We're going to poke him, and then he can do them. He's not going to play football because no kids I have would play football, but we can go rock climbing,
Sure.
And seeing this guy do that is absolutely amazing. It's like, it's ammo for me, but now he's more comfortable, and I think Parker's at an age where they can bond, and so, he's doing things with Parker that I'm like, what are you guys doing? Like, stop. You are killing me. Sit down, let's watch a movie.
But that sounds like normal father-son kind of stuff.
Totally.
Like, they're supposed to stress you out a little bit and break some of the rules. Like, that's all normal stuff that's supposed to happen.
Exactly.
I want to pull Murali in, but you just kind of reminded me, too, something that might be of interest. A lot of hemophilia clinical care can be traced back to some extraordinary clinicians from the Denver University of Colorado. And the Colorado lifestyle and culture is so outdoor oriented, that's just accepted. There's not a question of like whether or not someone can ski or whether or not someone can climb a 15er, a 15th. Yeah. It's just you do it. And here at the treatment center, we help those with hemophilia figure out how they can do it. Right. And I found that really encouraging, and it makes sense that in a place like Colorado, that would be the attitude. And I think that's an attitude that, I was talking with somebody a little while ago whose son wants to play soccer and be very active. I think there's ways that we can adapt to figure out a lot of the other athletic or physical challenges, solutions, desires that come up when you have a bleeding disorder. Last up on the panel is Murali Pazhayannur, and Murali has a really interesting story. He's originally from India and grew up with, as you're about to hear, essentially no care for his severe hemophilia, which led to, in his estimation, hundreds if not thousands of joint bleeds. He talks about what it was like growing up, a frightening near-death experience, his journey to the United States, and how he maintains active in the India bleeding disorders community from the U.S. So let's jump back into the conversation, picking it up with Murali. So you were born in India in 1960.
Yes.
You no family history, but were diagnosed when you were 4 and a half,
correct,
something like that, and then went to graduate school, have a PhD in immunology. At 29, came to the United States, started working. Was it in a research lab that you were working?
Yes, in Milwaukee. Yeah.
In Milwaukee, and then when it was a little bit too physical, ultimately, and you made a career shift into the IT world, where you've been for the last 17 years. And then your son is how old?
Yeah, so he just graduated. He will be 22 soon.
Be 22 soon.
Yes.
And he comes home to celebrate that with the family.
Next weekend, yes.
So that's kind of like the real quick, broad stroke of your story. But before we go there, we know we have about 17,000 people diagnosed in India with hemophilia, but a country of 1.2 billion, by the numbers, should have... we estimate that's 15% of the total, that 17,000 number?
Yes, yeah. Mathematically, there should be 120,000 patients with bleeding disorders in India.
So without a family history, the first thing that I think is kind of interesting is how did you wind up getting diagnosed? Because unfortunately, so often diagnosis doesn't occur, and there's bleeding episodes that lead to death at such a young age. How were you diagnosed so young?
The diagnosis happened at the tonsillectomy operation. And fortunately for my family, there was an American doctor visiting, training at that hospital who knew about hemophilia, and he said we need to get him tested. It looks like a bleeding disorder, and they tested, and then that turned out to be hemophilia and hemophilia A.
Just speak a little bit about kind of the culture and the way your family managed your hemophilia growing up.
I started with fresh whole blood. And it had to be fresh whole blood to have the clotting product. It couldn't have been frozen blood. I had bumps and on my forehead at crawling age, and the family used to joke around saying, "Oh, that's his own headlight." So the jokes. I mean, yeah, nothing was done because there's no diagnosis until 4.5. I slowed down because of knee bleeds and not able to move. So started to go from playing cricket and hockey and things like that to just not doing much, and started to read a lot more. And then at 18, I had a fall of some kind. I don't remember. It probably is due to the monsoons. I must have slipped and fallen. I had a hip bleed, internal hip bleed. I lost a lot of blood. Somebody, again, fortunately for me, in that hospital knew that in a different city far away, there was this product called cryoprecipitate. And this is late 70s. It's the old India. The only way to get that, there was no UPS or FedEx or any of those overnight shippers in those days in India. So they had to get the cryo, put it on an ice box on dry ice, find an airline pilot through networking who was actually flying that night from Bombay, where the cryo was, to Calcutta, where I was. And then, so that's how the 5 or 6 bottles of cryo came over to Calcutta that saved my life.
During that whole, so up until 18, and especially as you stop playing cricket, you're doing a little more reading during this frightening incident. How were you doing emotionally, mentally? You're very strong-willed and you're very intellectual and practical, it seems, in many ways. But I imagine as a teenager developing and thinking about, am I going to be able to get married one day? Am I going to be able to have a job one day? How am I going to live as I get older? What did that do to you? I'm sure these thoughts must have crossed your mind.
Yes. I was basically isolating myself because at that point I was getting quite angry, saying, okay, well, this is happening, and I'm deteriorating. At that point, after the accident, it had caused some nerve damage that I lost my right leg. I was fully paralyzed. I was in severe pain because of the pressure of that clot on I was on painkillers and, withdrawal and all that also happened. And I was very disappointed and was, not clinically depressed, but mentally extremely sad. But the good thing is I had my family and they were everything. And I had some good friends. They would come over, they would spend some time. So I had a lot of good support at home and in my neighborhood. In the olden times in India, if I did not have an education, I would be nobody. I would not get anywhere in life.
Because manual labor was out of the question.
Yes. Anything physical was out of question. There was no, and this cryo was extremely expensive and there was no insurance. There still is no insurance. So yeah, but the joint damage continued to happen. With every bleed, there is joint damage. It's hard for people to remember or to understand that, but if you've seen my joints, you will realize that this is like hundreds and probably thousands of bleeds into the joint because of lack of treatment. But I had the support, and I knew I was fairly focused to say if I did get educated, there is a possibility that I would find a job, I would do something, and then I can think about other social things. But right now I need to, take care of the bleed.
Did you have the intention always to move to the United States or move out of India?
That's a different story there.
That's intriguing.
Because I had my PhD, and when I started looking for a job, the job was there, but I could not interview for that because of affirmative action. The jobs were open to the lower castes first, and then it moved up the ladders. I would never ever get an opportunity. With that kind of a population, somebody would fill it. And I went to do my PhD at a very, very premier institute, almost like the Harvard or MITs of India. So there was always a chain. There were always people coming to the US for further research. So I always had some contacts here, and they were always looking out for people from my institute. So there was both a pull from the US as well as a push. But hemophilia had played a role. My parents had already realized that even if I had a job in India, this bleeds and the disabilities and the difficulty to move, take the bus, public transportation is only going to worsen.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a little bit of a push from them also. Okay, well, you go to the US and make your life.
Right. Can you just take us through as well when you first got here and realized how different hemophilia care was in the U.S. from what you had experienced in India? Can you take us through that realization and maybe also how that's motivated some of what you do today?
So I had effectively no care in India. That was 29 years of my life. I went through the pre-existing condition clause phase in insurance. So 6 months, I could not see a doctor. I had insurance at my work. After that, I did see the doctor. It was a hematologist. I would still have to go to the hospital. They would have to get the drug from the pharmacy, warm it up. So like 4-hour, 5-hour trip for a 10-minute injection. The good news was the bleeds were coming under control fairly quickly. The drug was very effective. So it was a night and day difference. I'd missed the infections in the US because I was in India with no treatment. But I knew that what I'm taking now, which was purified factor, is still, there's a small chance of a risk in the early 90s. But when I got notified or found that recombinant factor was approved by FDA in 92, I started advocating for that with my hematologist.
And just to kind of put a button on it, you mentioned people coming here from India, from your school, and being in touch with people back home. You've spoken to me a bit about the networking mentality in India, and you referenced it with that pilot that the hospital was able to find to bring the cryo to you. You now do a fair amount of work trying to raise more awareness in India. You're actively involved in the hemophilia world in India as well. Can you just tell us a little bit about that work?
I am connected with the chapter head in Bangalore, which is a large city, about 5 million, and I provide them with what I have experienced. I just give back to the chapter, and he is trying to help out through his physical therapist, through his nurse, and through his hematologist as far as what they should do with the patients that they work with. So this is an ongoing process for the last 3 or 4 years.
Thank you very much for participating in this and sharing so openly. Again, I think when you share openly and invites other people to share openly, and you make more meaningful connections with the community that is here. So thank you for enabling that today. Thank you again to Ann, Nichelle, and Murali for that great conversation. And thanks as well to Bob Robinson and Adam Hill from the Bleeding Disorders Association of Illinois for inviting us to keynote and kick off the meeting, and for all their support of Powering Through. I usually end these pods with a final thought. But on one of BloodStream Media's other podcasts, the BloodStream Media podcast, co-host Natalie and I typically end with what we call our parting shot. And you know what? I like that name, and I think I'm going to adopt it here on the Powering Through podcast as well. So I will be right back with a parting shot right after a final word from NCHS. NCHS believes in being a proactive partner in their patients' care, which means providing services like arranging convenient and discreet delivery, encouraging adherence to therapies, and monitoring your therapy outcomes. They also provide reimbursement services to help with navigating insurance requirements, which can be overwhelming for families affected by a bleeding disorder or chronic disease. And with a pharmacist available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, NCHS can offer comfort to patients that someone will always be there when needed. Check out their website to learn more, nchswecare.com, or call 877-626-6247. Again, that is 877-626-6247. I want to give a big shout out to Murali. Before I even asked him to participate in Powering Through, when he heard that the Believe Limited team and I were coming to town, he invited, but really insisted, we join him and his wife for a traditional home-cooked Indian meal. We, of course, were honored and thrilled to accept his invitation, and they treated us with outstanding hospitality. The experience also gave Murali and I a chance to get to know each other better, and it particularly gave me the chance to understand more about the circumstances in India and to spitball some ideas with Murali on ways care and access could be improved. Murali's commitment not only to his community in Illinois and his community in India, but to the global hemophilia community is truly commendable. For example, he and his wife enjoy traveling, and whenever they can, they make it a point to connect with community members in that area, to learn from them, swap stories, and, as Murali would say, network. I admire and am inspired by Murali's story, commitment, and friendship. I look forward to learning more from him over the years, and am honored that he participated in Powering Through. Thanks, Murali. And that will do it for episode 10 of the Powering Through podcast. Thank you for listening, and we will be back next month with another episode featuring another great conversation. Remember to subscribe to the Powering Through podcast on iTunes, SoundCloud, Stitcher, or wherever it is you listen to podcasts. You can also stream our podcast episodes, watch videos of the conversations, and learn more about upcoming Powering Through events by visiting poweringthrough.org. Thank you again to NCHS for sponsoring Powering Through and the Powering Through podcast. You can learn more about NCHS and their services by visiting nchswecare.com, where you will also find links to their Facebook and Twitter accounts. And you can learn more about all of BloodStream Media's podcasts for the bleeding disorders community by visiting BloodStreamMedia.com. This episode of the Powering Through podcast was written by Patrick James Lynch, produced by Patrick James Lynch, Andrew Gall, Avra Friedman, Colby Crow, Ryan Gielen, Rob Bradford, and Joshua Sterling Bragg. Artwork created by Ryan Gielen and Katie Wright-Mead, and the Powering Through podcast is edited by Mr. Andrew Gall. My name is Patrick James Lynch, and until next time, take self-care of yourself.